All right, what is going on, everybody? Welcome back to another pro video. My name's Jordan. I've got Max and Matt joining me here today, and it's Super Bowl week. Max, Matt, how you guys doing? You excited for the game?
I'm doing great. Yeah, I'm
Good.
excited. Very excited.
Cool. Yeah, I got these guys on to talk a little bit of Super Bowl DFS strategy, especially talking about some of the tools with SaberSim Ultimate, contest sims, things like that. Obviously, our play-by-play simulations, the contest sims themselves are going to put you in a great spot for your contests on Sunday. But in these pro videos, we like to go a little bit deeper, talk about maybe some more advanced strategy kinds of things, some ways that you can add value to the typical process we recommend on SaberSim here. So we'll be digging into that here on the show today. If you are new to SaberSim Ultimate, if this is maybe your first pro video you're watching, maybe you're new to NFL Showdown, maybe you're just new to SaberSim here, there are going to be some other videos in the description of this one that talk a little bit more about the basics here of how to get your builds going, how to get your entries file loaded, how to run contest sims in the first place. So we're going to do this video with a little bit of an understanding that you've probably already seen some of that content. If you haven't, you can check it out in the description below here. But let's go ahead and dive right in here because we've got a lot we want to talk about. Max, I'm going to kick it over to you right off the bat and just ask, is there anything in general that you think, projection systems tend to get wrong about the Super Bowl? Obviously, it's the last game. It's the big game. Ways teams tend to shift their play, ways usage gets distributed a little bit differently. Just anything in general that you've kind of noticed these models get wrong with the Super Bowl?
I think it's less than people think.
Mm-hmm.
So, I think a lot of people look at the Super Bowl and they think it's going to be played wildly different. They think there's going to be a lot more QB rushing. There's going to be a lot more things that, wide receiver rushes, trick plays, etc. And my opinion, and from what I've seen, is that's not really true. At playoff data and just seeing how these teams have played in the playoffs. And I think that's going to be a really good indicator of what's going to happen in the Super Bowl. But I don't think the Super Bowl itself versus other playoff games are really going to be that much different. I think the key thing for this Super Bowl is there's a few Chiefs players that might be in, might be out, that we don't know how much they're going to play. Sky Moore, Jerick McKinnon, Kadarius Toney.
Yeah.
And we might have them as out now. We'll see how they practice and whether or not they get in. But these guys might have a projection. And while SaberSim is going to be really good at efficiency metrics and how they're going to do with their usage, we're going to be kind of guessing on what kind of usage they're actually going to get if they play. And so I think that's going to be a real key factor in figuring out, or some way you can add value really is figuring out how much these people are going to play, if they're going to play at all.
Yeah. So, I mean, let's assume that, it's Sunday early afternoon and it's looking like one or all of those guys that you just listed are going to play, or at least they're going to be active. What does your kind of research process look like for building a sense of intuition if a projection is too high or too low there? Maybe let's say they're all projected kind of similar to these bottom range guys here, which is we're giving them a handful of snaps. If you were kind of wanting to go a little bit deeper into those players, what are some of the things that you might start to look into to get a sense on how you'd adjust those players?
Well, first of all, I think you just look into past games they've played, right? And just see what sort of the maximum that's going to happen is. And then essentially just looking at Twitter, looking at coaches' videos and interviews and try to get a gauge on, is this person going to play a lot? Are they going to play a little? And just try to really make a guess. I mean, that's what's hard about it, is that it is kind of a guessing game. And, someone like Kadarius Toney could be active and just not play. So it's definitely an interesting situation. You just have to read a lot and try to find reports about it, reports that you can trust, and look into it, basically.
Yeah. This time last year, we did a video talking specifically about prop betting for the Super Bowl. Is there anything in the prop markets that has jumped out to you? I know it's still kind of early in the week here, but to indicate, maybe something that projections might be a little off on, or just steam for ownership of the way that like the public is thinking about players playing in this game.
I haven't seen anything. I mean, I haven't seen anything in the prop market so far, aside from Brock Purdy rushing. It seems like Brock Purdy rushing overs have been very popular, and I don't know what we're actually projecting him from a rushing standpoint. It seems like it's sort of in line with the prop market, but
Yeah.
I think a lot of people seeing how much he ran versus Detroit and this sort of narrative that QBs run more in the Super Bowl and the playoffs, I think people are going to think he has more rushing upside than normal. That being said, I don't know how much that's going to affect his actual ownership in the Super Bowl Showdown contest.
Yeah, he did break off a couple in the NFC Championship too, which I think is just kind of leading to people thinking that that's going to be a part of the game or the game plan even here. So that was, I mean, maybe I'm a little bit of a fish here. The first thing I went in to look at when I started kind of taking an early look here is how we were projecting the quarterback rushing yards. And I actually thought these were pretty fair projections. I thought they were going to be a little bit lower. And maybe the first thing I was going to go do was increase some of the quarterback projections here for a little rushing upside. But I do think that is a popular take. You hear that a lot on, Twitter and just like other shows and touts saying, yeah, quarterback rushing upside goes up in the Super Bowl.
Yeah. I think another thing that's interesting is the Chiefs played some very cold weather games in the playoffs. Their first game was the temperature was 0 degrees, and you could see watching the game, the ball was like a rock, and it clearly affected the passing games. And then the Bills game was not warm either. It was probably in the 20s. And the Baltimore game was more normal weather, but that defense is really good. So I'm wondering if people are going to react kind of weirdly to this, thinking that the Chiefs ADOT is going to be lower, that they're doing more short passes. I wonder if we see more long passes in this game and more upside from the Chiefs receivers, but that's just a guess.
Interesting. Is there any particular receivers that you think might affect more than others?
Probably just Justin Watson and MVS. That would have an effect.
As kind of the deep ball threats there. Yeah. And I think that's, kind of one of the things that I was looking at here is just like a way to maybe get a lean on, some of these players here sub 3K ish, because they're all projected kind of similarly here. We're kind of giving similar ownership projections. So that seems like a good angle to at least just have a reason for wanting to go one direction over the other here. MVS, Noah Gray, there's a salary discrepancy there. They're projected almost the exact same, but if you think the deep ball is going to be a little more live for the Chiefs in this game, that makes a lot of sense to me here. So, Matt, let's pull you in here. From the sim perspective here, is there anything in our play-by-play sims, just the way that our sims work here, that you think we might kind of miss for the purposes of the Super Bowl here, or just not model as well, or just anything you think people should be aware of with the way that the sims work as it relates to the Super Bowl?
Yeah, I mean, I think we're going to do a pretty good job of generally getting like the expected, median outcomes in terms of usage and efficiency and all that. Obviously, what Max was saying about doing research on like coach speak and various news and stuff like that, you can make those adjustments. I do think that the biggest thing from my perspective that the sims miss, especially as it pertains to these like huge contests where you're looking for the outliers, is injuries. We don't sim injuries. So we don't have games where CMC gets injured in the first quarter, right? Yeah. And then Elijah Mitchell or whoever like gets the majority of the running back usage, or same thing for quarterbacks or wide receivers. And so that is something where if you're looking for like weird outcomes that are going to be low owned and when you those big tournaments, I think that is something that you can, I think especially research of like, okay, in past games, like based on who, like, can you tell who's going to get like the usage if some player gets injured? And like, I mean, I think it's a little bit tough because we're obviously, the sims are used in the building process and in the contest sim process, and it's hard to, if we're not simming something, to like get lineups that match those scripts. But I do
Yeah.
think that you can probably make some adjustments still based on, okay, if I think that there's a 1% chance that some player is going to get injured, like kind of bumping who the replacement would be, or even just like kind of hand like picking some lineups that you think are like more viable in those situations. I mean, this is like not something that I generally actually do because I'm lazy and I just kind of hit buttons. But if you're trying to like do some research, look into things, and like figure out where sims might not be telling the entire story, that's like where I would kind of recommend looking, or at least one thing that you can do to research.
Yeah, I mean, and you can kind of see it and intuitively just like Elijah Mitchell's 99th, like true 99th percentile outcome of the whole distribution of what's possible in this game is surely higher than 10.9 DraftKings points, right? Because he's, if something were to happen to CMC right in the first quarter of the game, he's very likely to be that next guy up here.
Yeah, I mean, I guess it depends on what the percentage chance of CMC getting injured in the first quarter is. I mean, I don't know if it's above or below 1%, right? But like, even if it's 0.1%, I mean, even if it's 1 in 1,000, that might not even display in the percentiles, but if that still matters for a 300,000 entry contest.
Yeah, for sure. And I don't even know if it's necessarily like a reason that I would go about adjusting projections or something like that. But similar to what Max was saying about, just thinking about the deep ball threat as like a game script kind of play, it is a reason, I think, for me to separate Elijah Mitchell from maybe some of the other guys in this similar projection range, because we know there's at least a little more contingent value there of, if something were to happen, this guy is likely the next man up. I mean, on that note, I'm curious, Max, your perspective on that. I don't want to, talk about a hypothetical CMC injury for too long here, but like, is that the right name here? I know Jordan Mason has been involved in the offense here at times this year. We don't have a projection for him at the moment, but I mean, Kyle Juszczyk was involved in the game. Yeah.
I think Elijah Mitchell is definitely the right name. I mean, I think one way you can approach it too is you can make a rule of only using Elijah Mitchell when Christian McCaffrey's not in the lineup. That's something that's viable. Again, though, as Matt said, there's one thing if Christian McCaffrey getting injured, and then there's another thing with Christian McCaffrey getting injured early enough to where this matters.
Yeah.
So, he got injured last game, and it actually did matter a little bit, but it was literally the end of the fourth quarter. So I think sometimes this kind of stuff can be a little bit of a trap and it doesn't really help. But that being said, the contest is really, really, really big. So, is it completely wrong to have like a Sam Darnold lineup? I don't know.
Yeah.
I'm not going to do that, but there's one in some amount of times that actually is going to work. So it's interesting. It's a, if we're talking about the flagship contest, it's just a huge contest. So you do have to think of ways you can differentiate your lineup in a way where you can get as big of a piece of the pie as possible of that $1 million top prize.
Yeah, I mean, the thing that's interesting too about like a rule that separates Mitchell and CMC is that is probably something a lot of the field is going to want to do anyway, right? Like the perception that those two players are negatively correlated, or that the fact that they are negatively correlated, is going to make probably a lot of people put that rule into their builds. And then you're limiting your ability to get viable CMC plus Elijah Mitchell lineups, which also have their own probability of being optimal and will probably be far less duplicated just because of that negative correlation there.
Yes, that's true. Although this is going to be a fishier contest than most because there's just so many entries. So I would say kind of trying to get off the more what are sharper people going to do mindset and more on what are the real fish going to do. Like obviously Travis Kelce's ownership being inflated, Patrick Mahomes' ownership being inflated. I think that's going to add more value to your process than, trying to go against the small portion of people who are going to exclude, Mitchell and McCaffrey together.
Gotcha. One other idea that had popped into my head, and then we'll kind of start building some lineups, talk some more process stuff here, was, being a little down on and or even thinking about a kicker fade here. Just feels like something where the teams are going to be far more aggressive on fourth down, on even extra points potentially. Max, I'm especially curious your thoughts on that. You think there's something to that, or is that kind of a fishy play of like thinking the Super Bowl is going to be this dramatically different football game?
Yeah, I actually think the total opposite. I would say
Okay.
both these teams are actually pretty conservative on fourth down. I think San Francisco is one of the most conservative teams in the league.
Yeah.
I think you could make an argument that people would be more conservative in the Super Bowl since making a mistake puts you under the microscope so much. So I actually would do the opposite.
Gotcha. Well, yeah, no, that's a good point. And I think it's easy to get in to start going down these rabbit holes of like, well, if this, then this, but it's very easy to make the intuitive argument to the other side, right? Like I'm over here thinking, the teams are going to be more aggressive. It just is likely almost that they'll be more conservative and kind of think, this is it. Take the points, take the field goal and move on. So,
and to what Max said about just like the contest being fishier than usual. I mean, if you assume that the like new fish DFS players are going to be just clicking, Patrick Mahomes, CMC, like they're not going to be clicking the kickers, especially like a double kicker or some like weird thing like that that's totally viable. But like, there's no one that's just building a lineup by hand is going to like want to pick kickers or defenses. So I think in general they'll probably be like a little bit under-owned compared to like a normal primetime game. I mean, I don't know how much that matters when it's like first place is all the money, but I think that's still going to make a little bit of an impact.
Cool. Well, I've got a build running here now, and we'll start to talk about, some process stuff in SaberSim. I do want to, Matt, give you a second to talk a little bit about our semi-recent improvement to the contest sim fields for NFL Showdown.
Yeah.
Do you want to kind of just talk a little bit about what was improved there for folks that haven't heard?
Totally. So it's really, really cool, really exciting. Basically, so the first thing is we're now building 20,000 field lineups instead of 10,000, what we were doing before. But the way that we're building those field lineups is just completely different. Before, essentially, we were kind of like running through kind of an optimizer-ish process where we would just like take projections, like build a bunch of lineups and try to make them sort of match what we thought the field would do. But it's just very hard to, especially with Showdown, build lineups in the way that the field actually is doing, because they're not just sticking through an optimizer. People are using sims, people are using group rules and all this stuff. So Will, one of our data scientists, basically like trained a really, really cool model that takes all of these different variables about these different types of lineups, whether they have a QB and their salary compared to like the max salary that you would use, and whether they have a defense against a QB and all these different factors, and basically trained a model for like the probability that lineups are going to be played. And then we can kind of like use that model to sample a real field and get much, much more accurate dupe predictions based on those like probabilities of a lineup getting played. So before, I think we were essentially we weren't really rating the lineups correctly, and the distribution was off, where the top projected dupe lineup would be way lower than the actual, like what the actual dupe count is. Obviously, we're still only doing 20,000 field lineups compared to the actual contest is 300,000 or however much it is, but you can kind of still scale those numbers accordingly. But this should be a much more accurate way of predicting dupes. I definitely want to caveat that like this is not perfect. Obviously, any projections that we put out are not going to be perfect, and especially I think because that other people are using these same numbers, it's kind of a unique thing about predicting dupes, where like predicting a lineup to be unique almost necessarily makes it like not unique, because that other people are using the same product. And so there's a little bit of a kind of catch-22 there. I do think that the biggest benefit of this update is avoiding those really, really huge mega dupe train lineups that are just completely, dead. Where it's like, yeah, 1,000, it's duped 1,000 times. There's no way that it can make enough, or that it can win often enough to make up for that lost equity. So I think avoiding those types of lineups is like the biggest win here. Rather than necessarily like ensuring that you're getting unique. I think it's more like, and that's, I think, where most of the edge in Showdown is avoiding those. I mean, first is playing lineups that are viable, that can win, and second is avoiding lineups that are played hundreds, thousands of times.
Yeah, and one of the things that jumped out to me here when this update went live, and this was, I think, at the start of the playoffs, roughly, right? So if you've been playing NFL Showdown
like that, yeah,
the playoffs, yeah, you've probably already been messing around with this here. But seeing some of the lineups be far more duped is the first thing that jumped out to me. I think before this update, the most duped lineup you'd see in your field of like 10K lineups would be like, I don't know, 9, 10, 11 times duped. You'll get lineups that are duped, 50, 30, 40, 50 times in your field of 20,000 here.
I think I was even seeing 100 and
really
150 plus. Yeah.
Oh yeah. So far more than you mentioned, with the massive size of these Super Bowl contests, we got, I think, a 300,000 lineup milli maker here, or at least like maybe the $3.20 max is that size. How do you feel about the scaling of our fields to kind of approximate the ROI of these lineups played into that contest? Like, how do you think these 20K fields are going to do at approximating ROI here and in a much bigger contest?
Yeah, I mean, it is tough to scale. Obviously, like so it actually is almost 500,000 entries for the milli maker and the play action. So like, multiplying the dupes by 20, right, is the first step. So like so I think we're sorted by ROI now. So obviously it's going to bring up like our projected kind of more unique lineups, but
we can look at
so the top one is the 160. So
yeah,
right, exactly. So like, I mean, if you just scale it linearly, then that's over 2,000 or 3,000 dupes, right? For like a scale to that size. So that's huge. I think the hardest, so I think that's probably somewhat accurate. I mean, I don't know what the actual dupe count is going to be, but really anything over a couple hundred you don't want to play anyway, so it doesn't really matter what that count is. The harder part is predicting like the uniques, where we might, if we're calling a lineup unique in a field of 20,000, it's really hard to know if that's going to be unique in a field of 500,000. Some of them will be, and some of them won't be. Or most of them, I'd say that we are saying are unique, probably won't be, because it's just so many different possible lineups out there that people are going to play a bunch of random stuff that you wouldn't think would ever get played, but it does because one person played it. So it's kind of like a fool's errand, I think, to try to like get unique here, and to worry too much about that like 0 to 10 dupes. I think really like the goal should kind of be like double digits, I would say, dupes, in terms of like, you don't want to play over 100 dupes in a 500K entry contest, probably, though there might even still be viable plus EV lineups like that. But that's kind of what I would aim for, is like, don't worry about getting unique and like you're just like, you really want to like go for that solo milli just for the clout. But it's just, I think, kind of impossible to really, I don't know, predict that from my perspective.
Max, what do you think?
Well, so what I was going to say is, I just want to make this point. So we've come a really long way over the last year. It used to be that when you were building lineups, the only way to really harness the power of our simulations was to build lineups, with sim variance at 10, utilizing, the sim optimal for 5,000 lineups. But Now, if you're on Ultimate and you can use our contest sims, you can just utilize our sims regardless of the lineups you create. So
Yes.
right now you have a lot more control of what kind of lineups you create at first and then measuring those against the sims. And so when you're building, you're going to want to use rules to use min and max exposures. You don't care about the sanctity of the sims as much because we're going to tell you, hey, this rates well in our sims and this doesn't. And for that reason, I think it's just really important to curate your lineup pool in a way where you're just eliminating, for research purposes, right? You can make a build where you use full salary just to see, oh, this is going to be duped 100 times, or if we scale this up 200 times, and therefore this is a completely useless lineup. And that's great. But eventually you're going to want to make some rules to limit your captain exposure for some people, right? Limit the max salary. Try to get more of those lower salary lineups, some of those off the board lineups. And that's going to be really important. I think an important part of the process for the Super Bowl is kind of leveraging some of these San Francisco players that probably are not going to be as owned as the Chiefs players. I think Chiefs players are going to be really popular. And so just thinking about trying to get more lineups that leverage something is going to be really, really key to your process.
Yeah, and I think that's a really good point. I want to add on to some of that here, especially as it relates to the SaberSim process, because I think this is an important thing to get as somebody kind of starts graduating and moving up their skill level using Ultimate here. So, before Ultimate, as you mentioned here, a lot of our recommendations in our content were for people to be very light act with a very light touch before the build, because the only way we could grade the lineups after the build was really with kind of an abstraction using SaberScore. Like in general, this is what a good lineup for an NFL Showdown looks like. So we were very heavily reliant on the play-by-play sims, and a lot of our recommendations were let the play-by-play sims build out this viable pool so that you don't kind of mess something up almost. The contest sims, especially with these 20K fields, this model update here, are getting much more accurate, much more precise at identifying the most profitable lineups from your pool after. So I think a lot of the work that somebody can be doing in their process now should be really focused on making this pool of 5,000 lineups as viable as possible. Things like salary restrictions pre-build, lineup rules pre-build, you don't have to worry as much about them negatively impacting your process now, because we can much more accurately grade the lineups post-build. So I just kind of, I know I'm repeating some of the things you said, but I really wanted to reinforce that point because I think that's just important for people to get here. So on that note, what are some of those kinds of things, Max, that you might be doing here? You mentioned, salary adjustments. You mentioned some lineup rules here. Like, what are the kinds of things what are the knobs that you might be turning here when it comes to build your lineups on Sunday?
Yeah. So I think the first thing is I always leave at least $1,500 of salary on the table. So to turning that to at least that. It's kind of interesting to think about with this giant contest, because Matt made a great point. It might be actually kind of impossible to get unique with a viable lineup. There's probably a couple that you can do. And I don't know if these two teams are great for having a unique lineup, because, the Chiefs are kind of concentrated and the 49ers are kind of concentrated. And that's not great for trying to get these one-off plays that do enough for you to be unique. So I don't think I'm going to go for trying to get a lot of unique lineups. I'm just going to try to get lineups that are duplicated, around 10 times or something like that. And I think what I'm going to try to focus on is getting more exposure to players that I think are going to be owned more than SaberSim projects, and get more exposure, get less exposure to players that I think are going to be owned more than SaberSim projects, and get more exposure on players that I think SaberSim is projecting at too high ownership. And I'm curious what you guys think, who is going to get steamed up and who's going to get overlooked. Because I have my opinions, but I'm curious what your guys' opinions are as well.
I definitely have the sense of a lot of Chiefs steam. I think that's where a lot of the casual money is going to go as well. I hate to say it, but I actually think the Taylor Swift effect is like very real for this slate. And I think I would absolutely take the over on 7.5 projected ownership for Kelsey captain. Probably 5.5 for Mahomes captain as well. I think as we are projecting it right now, I think the ownership projections are pretty solid for if this were a regular season, maybe Sunday night football game in the Super Bowl. I think we're probably just a little low on like most Chiefs at their current ownership. That's my sense.
Matt, do you have any thoughts?
No, not really, honestly. I have not been following the narratives well enough to have any idea where we would be off. I mean, intuitively, I would agree that like 40% CMC captain feels high for like this big of a contest, given that like if you go that direction, you have to choose like random low salary players to fill that in flex, I assume, and that's just kind of hard to do. Whereas like, you can, if you don't do that, if you go, Travis Kelce captain, then you can probably kind of fill in with like decent players all around. I don't know, but yeah.
Okay. Well, I have a strong opinion here, so I'm
Go
just
for
going to
it.
do my spiel. So something that I think is very clear to me is Brandon Ayuk specifically, I think is going to come in under-owned, and I think Brock Purdy might as well. And the reason is that most people sort of have this idea that the Chiefs defense is really good, which is true. And also they are notorious for playing the style of defense very often that's called two deep safeties, which is really bad for the sides of the field and for deep passes, which is basically Ayuk is an outside receiver. He has a higher depth of target. He doesn't do the middle of the field as much. And I think most people are just going to think that, when they have to choose between Deebo Samuel and Ayuk, Deebo Samuel is going to feel a lot better in this matchup, even though we have them projected pretty similarly. So I think he is going to go under-owned quite a bit. And I think Brock Purdy might actually go under-owned quite a bit. How he looked in the regular season, which was he was an MVP candidate, versus how he's looked in the playoffs is basically night and day. And I think, he actually has a lot more upside than people think. And I think the perception there is he does not. And so I think he's sort of going to come under-owned in his projection. Whereas I think Mahomes, Kelsey, I think McCaffrey probably will come in high ownership. Pacheco, people like that are probably going to get quite high ownership and probably more ownership than we expect because of these narrative things. Like, people legitimately thinking that this game is going to be rigged for the Chiefs. This is a 600,000 person contest. I think that actually is going to have some effect, right?
Yeah.
And just the matchup feels sort of better. San Francisco's defense has not looked good. It is sort of more of a middle of the road defense. So that's sort of the angle that I am going to be taking here is trying to be more high on Purdy and some of his pass catchers in their passing game and try to be a little lower on Mahomes, Kelsey, and some of those Chiefs pass catchers.
So in the
I have seen some.
Oh, go ahead.
Sorry, just I've seen some like chatter on Twitter. I think about like Purdy's like pass attempts prop being like it's like 32.5 and he's only hit that like twice this season or something like that. And I think the fact that like the 49ers are so good and are always have been big favorites all season and have, like are often ahead most of the game versus like this is a close matchup. I mean, this is like obviously straightforward stuff, but he's obviously going to pass more in a game where there's a higher chance that they're behind or it's a close game than when they're playing some random team in the regular season where they're ahead all game. So this isn't like as advanced of analysis as Max's, but I do think like there's probably a perception like people are underrating. I'm agreeing that they're underrating the 49ers passing game just because, their 49ers are usually much, much better than their opponents relative to this game.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, that's a good point. On the practical side, like take a guy like Ayuk or Purdy that we kind of have this angle we want to take. Max, what is your actual approach to giving them a boost in your process? Is that something you like to handle with exposures, with projections? Like what would you actually do?
Yeah. So I think there's a couple ways to handle this. And it's interesting because, you change the ownership of Kelsey or Purdy or whatever in this build process. It's not going to actually affect the contest sim, right? It's not going to affect the lineups that we have in the contest sim. And the contest sim is so difficult to make that there's no way I'm going to do a better job somehow making my own contest sim lineups or somehow like trimming our contest sim lineups. So I don't want to try to change anything there. What I usually do is I make another metric that's just a custom metric that sort of just allows me to manually rate people down or up and sort of then make a metric that's like 80% sim ROI and then 20% my docking metric. The other thing I might do is raise some projections or lower some projections just to sort of like manipulate this process, do min and max exposures. I'm just basically trying to get more lineups with the players I want and less lineups with the players that I don't want. And then B, have some sort of system that will rate these lineups higher in the contest sim, knowing that I can't change the contest sim, but I can sort of dock ratings based on the ROI of that contest sim.
Got it. So just to be clear what you're talking about, you're talking about basically creating a like player metric.
Yeah.
Right? So uploading something.
It's like a metric that's like Max's rating. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. So negative ratings on guys you want to fade, presumably positive ratings on guys you kind of like, and then incorporating that into a custom metric that takes into account both the ROI in the contest sim, but also this metric. So, a lineup that graded out as profitable, has a bunch of Chiefs, Kelsey captain, all guys that you were negative will kind of get punished, drop down a little bit lower in that combined rating there.
Exactly. It's just you need to find some way, and you can do it with projection as well, but you just need to find some way to, get those lineups higher rated, right? And you can't change the ROI. You could do that with projection, obviously, and we're going to do our thing with that. But it's just an easier way once you have your build to then say, okay, I want to rate this player a little higher, I want to rate this player a little lower, and it'll help you order the lineups in a better way.
The big takeaway for me there, and something I definitely agree with, is even if you kind of disagree with some of what is implied about the field via the ownership projections, you're probably best off trying to act on that in a way that is not creating your own custom field. That's my take, because the custom fields we have here are 20,000 lineups. First of all, you're not even going to be able to get to 20,000 here. And they are really hard to work with just in general. It's very hard to build a good field. That my way I would handle that, again, like I'm taking the over on 7.5 captain ownership for Kelsey here. I would probably make an adjustment to Kelsey's projection. That would be my approach here, to just get a little bit less here and kind of get my fade in that way here. Matt, do you have any thoughts on this here? You look like you're thinking about something.
I was kind of thinking about just the fact that I have a very different approach to building showdown lineups than Max does, which is good. I think for me, like, I generally don't care that much about the ownership projection in general. I just care more about like the lineup constructions themselves and like what kind of lineup constructions are going to be over or under played by the field rather than like specific players. I mean, I do agree with the logic about 49ers passing game and all of that. But yeah, I mean, I think for me, like I tend to do more manipulation and stuff I do use custom metrics and like lineup filters a lot, but kind of more on the just looking at like the lineups makeup and projection and then like the contest and metrics, and trying to identify lineups that might be like, yeah, maybe we're under projecting their dupes or vice versa, especially for comparing like the 20,000 field to the 500,000. I want to do more than just relying on our dupe prediction. I mean, like I obviously when you asked before, I was saying, oh, don't worry about it too much, but I think that there's still obviously a difference when you're going up that magnitude in the size of the contest of doing additional work to get more, different than you would naturally get, especially since you can assume there will be many other SaberSim users that are just hitting your default, doing the default build, running a default contest sim, and sorting by ROI. You can kind of assume like the top 150 like lineups in this build by the milli ROI will certainly be played right in the contest. Like none of them I think are going to be unique, because there are probably enough SaberSim users in this contest that, I mean, maybe some of them will, because not everybody's getting the same lineups and all that, but I think that there's probably more that you can do once you have a pool of lineups that you're comfortable with. Even if you don't have any player takes, there's a lot that you can do to manipulate that pool to kind of get more unique than you would by default.
Can I ask you something, Matt? Is one of the things you're talking about like stack exposure, like trying to get more onslaughts versus 3-3, or are you talking about like what's an example of something that you're doing?
So I mean, really, I guess an example of what I've been doing lately is, and this is like something that I'll do that I think is like very easy when I don't like spend that much time on the lineup. So I'll like kind of just build like a default pool, and basically I'll like filter out so that I'm essentially filtering out, like I'm only including like the top 20% maybe by like ROI or by win rate. Even so, sometimes I'll use win rate as a way, because win rate doesn't account for dupes. So like that's kind of one way that I've thought of like, okay, let me only filter out the lineups that I think, or that SaberSim thinks can win, right? And then kind of within that filtered pool of like, okay, these are only lineups that can win. I'm going to be really, really aggressive with like basically like almost sorting by like projection ascending, like taking like the lowest projected, lowest salary lineups that I can among lineups that still have the ability to win. This is something that I was doing especially before like the field lineup update, where like when I felt like we weren't being aggressive enough with dupes, I was like, okay, I want to just like take the lineups that are essentially like sim optimal type lineups, and then like just be really, really aggressive. I don't think you have to go quite that far, but like that's just something that I've played around with. I'm not saying that's like you should just copy what I'm doing, because I mean I don't even play DraftKings. It's just something I've messed around with a bit. But especially for FanDuel, I mean, we haven't been talking about FanDuel doesn't have that field lineups update because we didn't have the data to build it. So like if you are playing on FanDuel, you do kind of need to be more, do more to avoid dupes and more to kind of get around those like big trains. So that is something that you could play around with, like kind of filter out basically the unviable lineups and then be really aggressive with like fading the super chalky lineups.
I see. So basically your sort of approach to it is, hey, I know this contest sim that we have is not perfectly matching what's going to happen in the contest because it's only 20,000 and there's some flaws with this. So I want to make sure that I'm getting lineups that have high win rate, which is going to make my lineups profitable, and sort of trying to account for, okay, this lineup's actually probably going to be duped and this ROI is wrong. So let me try to get out some of these lineups.
Yeah, pretty much. And honestly, I think one thing that's like, if you have the time, which I mean, everyone kind of does because there's only one game, is like manually looking through your lineups and like just trashing ones that you kind of can know by intuition are going to be really popular. obviously we have a really good model now, but it's still just a model that is trying to predict human behavior, and that's hard to do. And I think Max probably would agree with this, of like, you can look through lineups and be like, no, there's no way this is unique. This is going to be played a bunch of times by like hand builders or like sim bros or whatever. I'm going to trash it or do whatever or edit it. Like there's a lot that you can play around with there and use your intuition if you played these kind of contests before, of like knowing what the types of content, the types of lineups that are popular can be sometimes pretty obvious, even if they're like low salary or low projected.
And Matt, you had mentioned something a second ago of like, if somebody follows exactly what you tell them to do, they're just going to end up duping you anyway. I made that point in our showdown video at the start of the season. I think that's really important. The goal of this video is to help give people some ideas of the things they might want to do. But if you kind of step for step copy anyone the way they're approaching the slate on content that you've seen about this game online, you're just going to end up probably sharing a lot of equity with all of the people that have watched that content. Like finding something that is unique to the way you want to approach the slate. Like Max gave some of his takes about this game. Maybe you disagree completely. That's good, right? Because like the way that you will make your unique adjustments based on your research will actually lead you to being a little more unique. I think that's part of what makes NFL Showdown really fun, is that like you actually get EV out of doing something that is really your own way.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, on that note, I will say I actually do like messing with these stack types quite a bit. That's something that I tend to play with. Even just like a general perception of what I think the field is going to do with the game, even just based on the spread or just the buzz. A lot of times I will go in here and kind of force my constructions to be different. Like I will probably be pretty heavy on 49ers stacks of this game, maybe 49ers onslaughts. Some of that is just because I like 49ers -2. And also some of it is because I think Chiefs are just going to be very popular here. So I tend to mess with these quite a bit, even just in regular season games, but probably definitely here for this game. And I will really like 49ers onslaughts in particular that feature like a unpopular Chief, like that fade Mahomes or Kelsey, and just play like none of the popular Chiefs and just hope that the 49ers win this game by quite a bit. But one thing I wanted to, two things actually I wanted to quickly address here. Anything else that jumps out to either of you guys when we start talking about FanDuel here? Matt, you had mentioned it kind of about the fields, but anything unique to the FanDuel side of things as it relates to this game that, different from what we've talked about here?
Yeah, I mean, I think we've talked about this on past videos, but, it's obviously FanDuel is just way harder to be unique. I think it's probably going to be almost impossible to have a like plus EV unique lineup on in the big contest, just because with the MVP salaries being the same, it doesn't really make sense to put low projected players in MVP, especially given like these teams with like so much of the talent kind of concentrated at the top. I think even more, it's just kind of an extension of what I was talking about before, of like you kind of want to go for like double digits dupes, even on FanDuel. Probably like there's going to be a lot of plus EV, like over 100 dupes that are still like winning often enough to be worth it. If I would say like the only way to like really have unique or like low dupe lineups that can win is like kind of trying to predict injuries essentially, which is, it's not really fun to play that way because no one wants to watch the game like praying for an injury and then like playing for an outcome that's like a 0.1% chance of happening. It's so I don't really have like too much advice other than what I was saying before too, with the we know that the fields are not, frankly, they're not as accurate as the DraftKings fields. So you just kind of have to do a little bit more to avoid dupes there.
Cool. One other question I wanted to touch on here, contests I know that we've talked about before on these pro videos, but for more of the high stakes, kind of smaller field stuff, especially when we start to get into the field sizes that are in theory captured, like under 20,000 entrants, even, smaller than that. How does your sense of strategy change when you start to think about the high stakes, smaller field stuff for this game?
I think it's interesting, especially for like the really small field where it's like maybe 100 people or whatever. But I mean, even for any of them, I think it gets more into, actually being unique becomes more important.
Yeah.
Which means it's more like you're doing even more of trying to predict what like individual other people are doing, not necessarily like by username, but or maybe even by username. I mean, it's like there are certain high stakes players that, for example, like always play captain defense. I won't name names. I think you see him at the top at the beginning of contests very often, but like even kind of knowing the types of constructions that are going to be played, I think there is more like intuition that comes into play there of like the game theory of trying to like avoid those lineups that are going to be played by others, and probably more, the contests are less fishy, and so there's maybe more of like what you were saying earlier of like avoiding those common rules or those common types of constructions that, like avoiding the CMC Elijah Mitchell lineups. There's going to probably be sharper players in like the mid or high stakes contests that are kind of doing more straightforward, like logical rules like that. So maybe there's more EV in like doing weirder constructions because you're not competing against like the fish, you're competing against sharp players, but still a bunch that are not going to care too much about dupes. I don't know. I don't know if Max has more insight there.
You're muted, Max.
You're muted.
I'm sorry. I don't have like a strong insight. I think, the difference between a smaller field and a bigger field like this is our contest sim is not a toy game anymore. It's actually like completely mirroring what the lineups work. So you can sort of trust the ROI lineups a bit more. But then again, if the contest sim has ownerships that are not accurate and there's variance in those ownerships as well, the numbers can come out a lot different. My approach usually is I'm just trying to play the best lineup I possibly can that I think is going to have a very strong chance of being a unique lineup. And sometimes that's easier. That sort of naturally happens because I have a very strong take, and sometimes it's harder to do. And so, yeah, it's less about trying to get off more of an off the board play and more of trying to just find that threshold between this is the best lineup that is going to be unique. So it's like not that far off the optimal. So,
yeah, I think there's also like probably a little bit of value digging a tad further into your pool here, especially if you think that there are going to be other SaberSim users in the contest, or for a fact they are, because these are going to be pretty fragile ROIs to being duped even one more time in a 100-person contest or something like that, a 200-person contest. So, finding a lineup that you like that is your 10th best lineup here, that the contest sim also identifies as not being duped here, might give you a little bit of an additional edge there on a lineup that's, 15% more likely to be unique in the contest that you're actually playing or something like that. So,
yeah, I think there's also a little bit of, I think sometimes people probably underestimate the value of still being kind of contrarian in like a smaller, I mean, the Mega Milli, 4444 contest is 750 entries, which I think I think that's still big enough that, you're obviously not just going to play like a cash lineup. You're not going to play, you're going to get a lot of value in being contrarian still. And I think probably a lot of people will just sort of play it safe in that type of contest, especially like a whale versus like a pro. I think, yeah, basically there's value in digging a little bit deeper and taking some care to find a lineup that obviously is still viable, that can kind of win frequently enough to make it worth it. But you don't want to just go with like, okay, this is a small contest, I'm just going to play like the best lineup and just eat the dupe equity penalty.
Cool. Max, were you going to say something?
Oh, I was just going to say, I think that's a fair point, and especially when it's so top heavy, like the 4-4-4-4 one is a third of the prize pool is for first. So there's definitely a lot of value to being contrarian. It's not just about playing in optimal. So I agree with that.
Cool. Well, we'll go ahead and start to wrap up here. A couple final questions for both of you. I'm curious your favorite edge for this slate, whether it is a player take or something about the game, or more kind of a process thing, a game theory angle, just like your thing that you are most excited to do to your lineups to get a little bit of an edge in this slate.
Mine is I'm going to use a lot of Brandon Ayuk in the flex. Probably a lot of Brandon Ayuk, just because I think, especially with hand builders and especially even without hand builders, I just think people are going to manually click Debo or get more of Debo or raise his projection compared to Ayuk. And Ayuk's going to come in really under-owned, and he's a really good wide receiver. So I think that the way we're projecting them right now is probably correct. So I'm just going to try to get more of him because I think his ownership is going to come in way low.
What do you think, Matt?
I mean, I think probably more on the process side of things. I mean, I kind of described like what my process is a little bit. I think I'll probably just try to, I mean, especially since I'll be playing FanDuel, kind of really trying to go aggressive with playing weird lineups that are still viable to win. And we'll see if I can get anything in under 100 dupes in a contest like that. But yeah.
Nice. Yeah, I am getting more and more into the idea of these San Francisco 5 stacks, in particular that don't have Mahomes or Kelsey on the other side, and even one step further that don't have CMC in the captain. I tend to play like generally a very wide range of different lineup constructions on NFL Showdown, but I am finding myself narrowed more and more into this particular construction, and might end up even taking just a shot on like only playing those types of lineups just because I think they're not going to be very popular at all, and find myself being a huge 49ers backer for this game. So one hot take about the game for fun.
I think I've already said, I think, well, the thing is I don't think Ayuk's going to do well. I just think he's going to do well more often than people think. So I guess my hot take would just be San Francisco's passing game performs better than people think.
That's such a
Matt,
boring
hand in the
take,
dirt.
Max. Come on. I mentioned it before. My hot take is that Noah Gray, captain, is going to solo bink the Millie. It's gonna be Travis Kelce gets injured. They're gonna be showing Taylor Swift her reaction the entire game. All the hardcore NFL fans are gonna be so mad that the broadcast is just showing Taylor Swift. All the Swifties are gonna be mad that she's upset. And Noah Gray is going to catch 2 touchdowns and be in the captain spot in the solo Millie lineup. So that's a hot take, Max. Take notes.
Okay. Right.
That is a proper hot take. I should have gone second. I guess it's similar to what I said is my favorite edge for the lineup construction side of this, but I like the 49ers to win by 10 or more. I really don't think that this game is going to be close. I know it's a Super Bowl. I know, $1 billion bet on the game and the spread's -2, but that's my hot take. So cool. I do want to quickly shout out Scott before we go here. We released a huge update to the app the morning before we recorded this episode here. The notes for that update are in the release notes channel in our Discord. But the Scott and the front end team put in a ton of work into this update here. You've probably been seeing it as we've just been bouncing along here today. And I really didn't notice just how awesome this is until we were on the video here today. But among many other things, the speed of the app bouncing back and forth between builds. So I can be in the build we already built here, then go back to the home screen to show how to change settings there. It is just amazing here. I'm so used to figuring out what I'm going to say while I'm waiting for a page to load on these videos here, and to just see them like pop up in a half a second. It is amazing. So huge props to Scott and the rest of our front end engineers for getting this out for everybody. With that, we will go ahead and leave it there. As always, you can be a part of this conversation, ask any questions you have about this video in the pro channel in Discord, share maybe your takes about this game, or talk strategy with some of the other Ultimate and Pro users there. Max, Matt, thank you guys for coming on and talking to me here for the last hour, and good luck, everybody.
Thanks.